So I want to tell you a story. Some of you know for a long time I've been deeply involved in health and medical affairs in many different ways. And one of the things that I do is to be a board member of the Lucy and Leap Institute in Boston, which is a part of the National Patient Safety Foundation. So I'm one who believes if we could help ourselves to do the right thing every day in health and medical care, we could make an enormous difference, because right now there are 2 million people every year who get an infection when they go into a hospital, and I'm here to tell you every one of them is preventable if we did things right. You know, there's demonstration that this is true. So there are a bunch of those kind of things. So one of the things I do, as I said, I'm associated with the National Patient Safety Foundation. And when my wife and I were coming back from our winter place, where we go, we don't actually own a place, but where we go and stay in a condominium overlooking Waikiki Beach for January and February. Thank God we were there this past winter, because it was unbelievable in Pittsburgh. I don't know if the weather we got came from here, but if it did, God bless you. Anyway, we were coming back, and the reason we were coming back at the end of February, because there was a board member of this board members meeting, winter meeting of this Lucy and Leap Institute in San Diego. And so we arrived in San Diego, I think, on February the 28th, and my wife has relatives there, so she went to dinner with them. I went to dinner with my fellow board members. And we're sitting there having dinner, and about 15 minutes into dinner, one of my fellow board members across the table, Susan Erdman Levitan, and her husband, sitting down here a couple of seats from me, and she said, Richard and I were talking, don't we remember that you have a serious past affiliation involvement with President Ford? And I said, yes, that's right, and I explained it to her. And she said, well, that's what we thought. And so we want to send you something. And I said, okay, tell me about it. And she said, well, Richard and I have been living in this townhouse on Beacon Hill for a long time, and our family had grown up, and our daughter, one of our daughters, had gone away and went to Africa and came back and brought a bunch of paintings with her. But we decided we needed to clean up our attic. And so the two of us went up to the attic, and we find this bundle wrapped in brown craft paper. And we said, well, you know, we got to get rid of stuff. Let's look and see what this is. So they commenced opening up this bundle of paintings, and they're mostly African landscapes that their daughter had brought back from her semester in South Africa or somewhere. And then they stopped, and they said, she said to Richard, look at this. And he said, what is it? And she said, look at this. And she showed him, this is a picture of President Ford. It's a portrait of President Ford. And they said, wow, it looks like a pretty good portrait. How could it get here with our daughter's paintings from South Africa that were bundled up from the framer that we never looked at when they came? And so they said, well, we've got to figure this out. So they called the framer. 3 years passed when he'd done this work, and told him that they had this painting, and how could they've gotten confused with their daughter's South African paintings, and would he please look into it and get back to them? And so after about 3 weeks, he called in the back and said, I have checked every way I know how, and I can't figure it out. And so the painting is yours. And they said, oh my goodness. So at the dinner now in San Diego, they said to me, so this is the story of how we came about this painting, and we thought you had this connection with the Ford family, and so we want you to have it because we're sure you'll do the right thing with it. We don't know what that is, but you'll know. So I said, sure. And I figured they'd send it to me and it would be something done by a 17-year-old in a finger painting class. And so after about 3 weeks, my wonderful assistant, Janice Celadona in Pittsburgh, said one morning, Mr. O'Neill, there's a package here for you from Federal Express. And I said, well, open it up, Janice. So my office has a long hallway, and at the end of the hallway by the entry from outside, there's a mail, file room and all of that. And Janice is in there, and I hear her opening up the package, and then she's kind of squealing, and she came kind of trotting down the hall, and I said, what is it, Janice? And she said, you aren't going to believe this. Look at this. And she turned the painting around, and it's this magnificent painting of Gerald R. Ford, a painting that captures the character of the president whose desk I sat at for 2.5 years. It is fantastic. And so I said, wow, I didn't expect this. So I looked at the painting, and it says on it, Margaret Holland Sargent. So, having learned a little bit about technology, I got on my iPhone and, Googled Margaret Holland Sargent, and what comes up are a whole series of paintings, including a little thumbnail of Gerald R. Ford. And it says this portrait is in the National Portrait Gallery. Yeah, right. It measures 28 by 22, and it wasn't clear anything more about it, except at the bottom there was a quote from John Howard Sandon, who's a famous portrait painter, saying, Margaret, congratulations, this is a great portrait. So just by coincidence, John Howard Sandon painted my portrait, my official portrait for the U.S. Treasury. So I know John Howard Sandon, and I figured, I'm going to call up and find out about his affiliation with Margaret Holland Sargent. But before I did, I thought I need to find out more about this. So I said, Janice, I want to talk to the curator at the National Portrait Gallery. And so, it's amazing, how the right words open up doors to you. So Janice called the curator's office and said, former Secretary of the Treasury would like to talk to the curator, and she was instantly on the phone, If she told him it was Paul O'Neill, I probably would have had to wait a couple of months. Anyway, she came on the phone, and I told her the story about, I have this painting, and it says it's in your collection at the National Portrait Gallery, and it says it's 28 by 22, and I measured the painting I've got here, and it's 24 by 20. And she said, Mr. Secretary, we're in the middle of launching a new exhibit. And this is a very fascinating story, and I want to deal with it, but I'm going to be a week or 10 days before I'm going to have time to look into this and figure it out. So I said, okay. And so I wasn't done, so I figured I've got a name of a person who painted this, and I Googled her. And it turns out Margaret Holland Sargent lives in Hollywood, California. She's 83 years old, and when you speak to her on the phone, it's like speaking to a 33-year-old. She's lively and spry, and I told her why I was calling, that I had this painting, and it's this big mystery. And I said to her, now, the National Portrait Gallery website says it's 28 by 22, and the one I have is 24 by 20. And did you paint more than one of these? And she said, no, I only painted one, and it's 24 by 20. So then, a couple of things went through my mind. One thing that went through my mind is I now possess stolen property. And what the hell am I going to do? Oh, So Margaret said, when you figure this out, please call me and tell me. So I called John Howard Sandon, and he said, indeed, Margaret and I and his wife and maybe 20 other people were members of a portrait society group in New York in the 1970s. And when Margaret painted this painting, he saw it and made that compliment that now appears on the National Gallery website. And he said, Paul, she is the real deal. She is really an excellent artist. And when I talked to her, I discovered that she had painted it as a cover for the Time magazine. And interestingly, it never appeared actually on the cover of Time magazine, but it did appear in Time magazine in 1976 when they ran a special feature on U.S. presidents, and it was published there. It's the only place I can find it was ever published. So Margaret told me she painted this painting overnight. You know, as an amateur painter, I can't tell you. You know, it makes me want to burn my brushes. That somebody could do this magnificent thing overnight. And so finally, the National Portrait Gallery person called me back very graciously, and she said, we actually have a special curator for Time magazine covers, and we've exhaustively checked our files and all of the records we have, and we can't find that we've ever actually had possession of the painting you're talking about. And we've also talked to our people, and we don't think we have any rights to it. And so it's yours. And so I didn't tell you a little story. I have to wing my way back for a minute and say, my son runs a hedge fund, and he's got workspace close by me in the same space. And when he saw this painting, and I was saying, oh my God, look at this, Paul. He said, I know where it goes, and he got a hook and hung it up in our conference room. So that's where the painting was. So I said, yeah, well, that's really cool, Paul, but it's not the right thing. What the right thing is for, I already have an engagement scheduled to go to Grand Rapids to commemorate President Ford's 102nd birthday. And I want to take this portrait with me and give it to Susan Ford and let her decide what should be done with it, with my suggesting that it would be wonderful for it to hang in the museum in Grand Rapids where people can see it every day.